Hare Krishna, Haribol. We're already a couple minutes late, so we'll quickly do Kirtan and start. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Radha Gokulananda, Radha Gokulananda, Radha Gokulananda, Radha Gokulananda, Radha. Jaya Radha Gokulananda, Radha Gokulananda, Radha. Radha Gokulananda, Radha Gokulananda, Shri Radha. Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya. Nitai Gaura Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaura Hari Bol, Nitai Gaura Hari Bol. Shri Harinam Sankirtan Yajna ki, Hare Krishna Mahamantra ki, Om Premanande, Hari Bol. Hare Krishna, Haribol everyone. Haribol Dhanarada Mataji, Dhanarada Koli Mataji, and everyone else is online right now. Haribol Bhuvaneshwari Radha Mataji. Wonderful to see you all here. And so today we will be carrying on with our Bhagavad Gita chapter overview as we quickly move through the summary of the Bhagavad Gita. Before we start, I'd like to take the blessings of all the senior Vaishnavas so I may be able to glorify and explain this Bhagavad Gita. Then, without further ado, let's begin. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudirayet. Hare Krishna. So, as we're carrying on with Bhagavad Gita chapter 3, the second part, we've just moved on from how Arjun, we'll just recap quickly what happened last time. So Lord Krishna has explained through the second chapter a lot of information. He goes through it very quickly, and Arjun has a little doubt, and he says, so you've explained knowledge, and then you've explained doing work. You've explained both sides of this story. And he sort of, in his mind, knowledge meant to him renunciation, and doing work meant fighting the battle. And so he's saying to Lord, Jayasi ched karmanaste mata buddhir janadara tat kim karmani ghore mam niyojayasi keshava. You're telling me this sort of equivocal instructions, and I'm confused. You're saying I should be in knowledge, but you're also saying I should work. So he's taking it as when you have knowledge, you'll become renounced and you don't do the work, and doing the work is opposite of having knowledge. So he's taking it sort of in which way do you want? You're saying I should renounce, but you're saying I shouldn't renounce. And then between verses, I believe 3 to 9 of the third chapter, Lord Krishna explains, no, it's not like that. It's detaching yourself from the fruits of your work. So you do the work, but then you detach. And then he realizes that Arjun's not caught on. He's gone a little bit, if you want, too quick. So he has to slow down. So he takes it back a little, and he explains this whole sort of yoga process, the yoga ladder, of where it begins, the various rungs on the ladder. And we're going to carry on seeing that today, and also in the next couple of chapters. And obviously the problem is, if you mistake one of the rungs to be the goal, the end, then that's where the problem is. The goal in the end should be Lord Krishna. So someone who doesn't follow any instructions and just enjoys as much as they want, and then after that there's someone who's a little bit better because they do what they want to enjoy, but they at least follow the Vedic literature, the Karma Kandiya sort of side, where it tells you how to enjoy, how to work. And then past that, there's someone who knows that still wants to enjoy, but realizes that Krishna is the goal, etc., etc. So we move on through this yoga ladder. And so from the verses 10 to 16, is that sort of karma kanda philosophy that's mentioned. And then we next move on from that into the nishkama karma section, so the fourth section of this chapter. And so Krishna has just explained what karma kanda is. You do your work, you get material result. It's only material though. The results are temporary, they're short-lived, but you get some happiness, material, temporary happiness, and then you move on. And why is that good? Because it means that if you're doing that, at least you're not breaking the rules. It's better to follow some rules and enjoy than completely break rules and enjoy the senses without any limitation. So this limits sense gratification. And so he talks about the next section from the verses from 17 to verse 35. So the chunk of this chapter about doing work, being renounced, but also understanding with emphasis the importance of doing work rather than opposed to being renounced and then giving up your work as well. And so Lord explains from verses 17 and 18 where we begin. So we've just finished off verse number 16, and then the Lord establishes why following the Vedas is sort of why is it useful, why it's better than living a life full of sin, and the problem of living only for sense enjoyment. And then the Lord describes in verses 17 and 18 someone who's self-realized. So just read verse 17. But for one who takes pleasure in the self, human life is one of self-realization, and who is satisfied in the self only, fully satiated, for him there is no duty. So he seems to be saying there's no job that you have to do right now. If we look at it just from what he's just said, the Lord's saying that someone who's satisfied in the self, who's an atmaratihi, he's satisfied in his own self, the source of his happiness is within his own existence. It's not that he's looking somewhere else for happiness. That sort of person, they have no duty, is what I'm saying. But then he explains what does he mean by he has no duty, but he still carries out his prescribed actions. In verse number 18, Lord explains that a self-realized man has no purpose to fulfill in the discharge of his prescribed duties, nor has he any reason to perform such work, nor has he any need to depend on any living entity. So this type of person, he's without anyone else's help, without being dependent on anyone else, He's self-satisfied, he's self-realized, he knows who the self is, he understands where his happiness comes from, he's happy as he is, and he doesn't need to depend on anyone. However, the Lord explains that even though he has no one to depend on, what does he do? He still carries out, so verse number 19, therefore, without being attached to the fruits of the activities, one should act as a matter of duty. For by working without attachment, one attains the supreme. So throughout this whole section, the Lord's emphasizing that one should do their duty. It's not that when one becomes renounced, they just give up their duty. Instead, rather, one should be doing their duty. One should perform their prescribed activity. Because, of course, Arjun said at the end of the first chapter, he said, I'm going to renounce. I'm going to put my weapons down. I'm going to go to the forest. I'm going to renounce myself. I don't want to do anything. Sorry, at the beginning of the second chapter and the end of the first chapter. And so then the Lord thinks, okay, I need to explain why you should be doing this duty, but with the correct knowledge. And so he gives examples. And so he says that, so currently we're in someone who's situated in the mode of goodness. This person, they know what is the thing in the material world that keeps them happy, that they are self-realized, they're happy already. And then this type of person who's situated in the mode of goodness, he carries on working. And why does he carry on working? Because he realizes, firstly, the importance of carrying out prescribed duties, not for themselves to function, because they understand that they'll function without it. They're not dependent, but they'll also set an example for society, as we see later on. And so he explains in verse number 20 the example of Janak Maharaj, King Janak. And kings such as Janaka attained perfection simply by performance of prescribed duties. Therefore, just for the sake of educating people in general, you should perform your work. So Janak Maharaj, who we also know as the mother of Sita in the separate pastime of Lord Ramchandra, Janak Maharaj is a great king. And Krishna has given the example that King Janak, he worked, he was doing his duty, he didn't give up his kingdom, he carried on. He carried on fulfilling his role as a king, he carried on working as a king and carrying out his activities as a king. And he's he's a great devotee of the Lord. Actually, when Yamaraj mentions to his servants, Yamaraj is explaining to the Yamadutas, he explains that there's these 12 Mahajanas. There's so many Mahajanas. Mahajana means great person or in particular great devotee. And so there's so many of them, but he names 12 specific or 12 principal great devotees. And in there is Janak Maharaj. So we've got Lord Brahma, we've got Narad, we've got Lord Shiva, the four Kumaras, Kapiladev, Swayambhuva Manu, Prahlad, King Janak, who we're going to talk about now, Bhishmadev, Bali Maharaj, for those of you who are celebrating Onam, Bali Maharaj, Vyasaki, who is Shukadev Goswami, and Vayam, who's talking about himself, me, Yamaraj. So these 12 devotees of the Lord, the 12 Mahajanas, they're great devotees of the Lord. And King Janak is actually mentioned among all the great devotees of the Lord. King Janak is actually mentioned specifically as well as one of the greatest of the devotees of the Lord. And Janak Maharaj carried out his activity. He carried out his work. He was a king. He performed kingly duties. He took care of the kingdom, and he made sure that not only from the political point of view, everything was sorted. And he didn't give up his work. So giving up one's work is not a sign of detachment. And as Lord's mentioned earlier, but it's also mentioned again, that one should not be renounced externally, but then internally be desiring something. So you give up everything externally, you say, okay, you know what, I'm done with my job, I'm finished. But on the inside, you still want to earn money, you still want to do a job, you still want to work. Then that person is pretender, he's fake, mityachara. He's a pretender. What's the point of that sort of person? That's not useful at all. No one's going to get anywhere if everyone's like that. So that's why the Lord's explaining that we should actually carry out our work. There's actually a story that goes about Janak Maharaj. So Janak Maharaj is, of course, a great devotee. And all the sages at the time, some of them, they gathered and they came to the king and said, so we've heard so many times that you're a great devotee of the Lord, you're a very elevated devotee of the Lord, and we've heard that how great you are as a great devotee. But still we see that you're a king. You're carrying out kingly duties. You're ruling a kingdom. You're going to war when necessary, etc., etc. He knows what he's doing. You've got a defense system. You've got a military. He's not made himself a sage or in the forest. He's not given up his work. And so they're saying, so you're carrying out all this material stuff. How are you spiritual? How are you even a great devotee? Can you please explain this to us? And so Janak Maharaj says, okay, come tomorrow for dinner. Or for lunch, sorry. And so sages leave. They come back the next day to have lunch at Janak Maharaj's place. And so what he does is he gets out this wonderful, you know, who knows what's it, like a 20-course meal with all various delicacies and preparations. And I'm not gonna say like what, because it's gonna make me hungry. But all sorts of wonderful foodstuffs are present. And then Janak Maharaj, before he lets them eat, he then shows them that, look up. What's that? It's a knife. Sorry, it's a sword. It's a sword. A small string attached to the ceiling, and from that string a sword is dangling. And so then he says, okay, eat. And so everyone eats, and of course they're seeing the sword. There's a sword above them that's hanging from a small string. Let's try and get out of here quickly. And so what they do is they quickly finish off their food. They quickly eat, and then they sit. And so then Janak Maharaj says, so wow, you finished very quickly. That's amazing to see. And so when you were eating, could you enjoy your food? Could you taste it? Could you really truly enjoy, you know, eating that gulab jamun? No, we couldn't. Why? Why could you not enjoy that? Oh, because we were thinking about this sword above us. If that fell on our heads, what would happen? And so Janak Maharaj explains that way, right? Just see, the whole time while you were eating, you couldn't enjoy, because the only thing you were thinking about is not the texture of the food, not how spicy the sabji is, but you're thinking about that there's a sword above and it can fall. That's the only thing that the mind's focusing on. And so similarly, when I'm doing my duty, I don't get stuck in that lavish lifestyle. Instead, because my mind is always focused on the Lord. And that is the greatness of Janak Maharaj. So he carries out his duty, and that's the example, of course, for people in the modern day. Because he carried out his duty, he carried out his worldly affairs, he lived a lavish lifestyle, there is no doubt about that. But he was still a great devotee, he was still very elevated at the same time. And so in the example of Maharaj Janak is given, Lord Krishna explains that kings like Janaka, these types of, I think the wording in the verse is Janakadayaha, Astita Janakadayaha. So kings like Janak and others, they worked. They didn't give up their work. And so they carried on with their duty, and they were still great devotees of the Lord. And so instead of simply renouncing externally for the sake of renunciation, one might as well truly, if they want, even if they have their material desires, simply just carry out their activities, but instead detach themselves from the fruit of their activities, which is again Nishkama Karma Yoga. And so then the Lord explains in a very, very, very important verse. This is one of the verses to be noted down in this chapter. Verse number 321. Yadyadacharati shreshtas tattateva taro jana sayat pramanam kurute lokastadanuvartate. Whatever action a great man performs, common men follow. And whatever standards he sets by exemplary acts, all the world pursues. This is very simple, realistically. When you see someone great, a great person, you're more likely to follow their activities. When you see someone who's, for example, materially well off, you try and imitate their actions. That's natural, because you want to be like them. You don't question it. Whenever someone sees a celebrity doing something, next thing you know is it's a trend. Why? Because whatever these so-called great people do, that's what other people follow. So in the same way, Krishna is saying to Arjun, you're a pretty high-level person. You're in Hastinapur, you're one of the Pandavas, your fame's all over the country, you're the best archer in the world. You're pretty high, you're up there. So your great persons, their activities are mimicked by the common man. And so you, yourself, you need to get together, you need to carry out your duty so that you can set an example for society. It's so important to understand that, because it's the natural tendency for people to imitate those who are greater than them without questioning or without overthinking or thinking too much of it. And so that's why it's so important for the people in society, the leaders of society, to practice what they preach, so that if they want, I'm trying to word it properly. What is it? Yata Raja Tata Praja, which means that just like the king is, that's generally how the people are. Because if your king is someone, or your leader in this sense, because we don't really have monarchies anymore, but if your king or your leader is someone who's arrogant, who's boastful, constantly, egoistic, and talking about how great they are, then it's natural that when people see him on TV or whatever, that they'll want to mimic his actions. Similarly, if the leaders of society in the present day are sort of, not great, if they're acting whimsically, then how can you expect the common men in society to be great? That's why it's so important that the leader sets the right example for the people in society. And so that's whatever action a great man performs is what common men follow, because that's simply the nature of society. So then Krishna is explaining to Arjun, you need to set an example. If you give up your work and go to forest, then all the other people will give up their work and they'll go to the forest, because they'll see you. He's the greatest archer. A lot of people look up to you. So they're also going to think, oh, okay, we should do that. Arjun's done that. We do that next. And so then how will society function in that way? So firstly, Krishna is saying that you should carry out your duty and renounce the result of your action. You're eligible to do your duty. Everyone has the right to do their duty, but you just don't have the right to take responsibility of the fruit of the activity, whatever outcome that activity produces. So in that way, Krishna is explaining that Janak Maharaj, he did his work. He's still a great devotee, still a great devotee of the Lord. And then we can talk about other devotees now, like Bhishma Deva, for example. Bhishma Deva is a very, very great devotee of the Lord, and he was surrounded by royalty. So the reason actually they call him Bhishma is because he took that great vow. And why is that vow so great? Why is the vow that he took so great? Because he took a vow of practicing difficult life, practicing Krishna conscious life, if you like, or practicing spiritual life while being surrounded by lavish royalty. And that's what he did. Although he was not a king, but although he was a prince technically, and he had this wonderful palace, he had so many servants and whatnot, he's still a great devotee of the Lord, because the point is that he didn't just take his actions or give up his actions while on the inside still being attached to things. No, instead what he did is on the inside he's detached, and outside he just carries on for the sake of it. So the first thing here that Krishna has mentioned is that you do your duty without taking the result. And the second thing is, Arjun, you're quite important. You're quite a great leader. You need to set an example, and you're exemplary for society. So you should therefore not give up your duty and should do your duty and fight. And so this is what Krishna is emphasizing again throughout these verses, mainly, especially in the first section of these verses. Lord Krishna emphasizes that we should carry out our prescribed duty. A lot of people again have the misconception that Bhagavad Gita is all about inertia. If you read the Gita, then you're gonna, give up home and go to the forest, is what some people have said. Or if you read, then you're not going to feel like doing well in school or studies or whatnot. And so people have this sort of misconception, but that's not at all what Krishna is saying. Why would Krishna tell Arjuna to fight if that's the point of Bhagavad Gita? Krishna is saying you need to do your duty and fight. He doesn't say, no, it's fine. Now that you've got this knowledge, you should become detached. So the point of this knowledge is to transfer someone from being attached to the fruit and the work to being so-called still to being detached from the fruit while carrying out the work. So that's the point of knowledge. Whereas knowledge is not renunciation of work, but renunciation of the fruit or the result of that work. So if you do something and then you don't think that, oh, because I did this, this happened. No, you did what you needed to do, and whatever happened by the will of the Lord. And then, so first Lord Krishna has given an example of Janak Maharaj. And then in verse 22, he gives the example of himself. He says, Name partasti kartavyam trishu lokechu kinchana nana vaptam avaptavyam varta eva chakarmani. O son of Pritha, Pritha is Kunti Maharani, there is no work prescribed for me within all three planetary systems, nor am I in want of anything. nor have I a need to obtain anything. So he says, I don't need any work to do in the whole 3 planetary systems or the whole universe. I don't need anything, and I don't want anything. And then he puts, yet I am engaged in prescribed duties. He still carries out, the Lord himself carries out his prescribed duties. And then he explains why in the next verse, next couple of verses actually. For if I ever fail to engage, verse 23, verse 23, if I ever fail to engage in carefully performing my duty, all men would follow my path. And what would happen? He explains again, if all men follow his path while giving up duty, if I didn't perform prescribed duty, all these words would be put to ruination. I would be the cause of creating unwanted population, and I would thereby destroy the peace of living entities. So Lord Krishna is himself saying, I don't have to work, but I am going to work anyway. Why? Because when the common man sees the great people, then he wants to do that, carry out what they are doing. He wants to become like them. And so the Lord's saying that if I didn't follow prescribed duties, then the whole world would be in trouble, because they'd look at my example and they'd start mimicking and they'd start causing havoc. And he explains that Sankarasya Chakartasyam, I'm going to be the cause of the unwanted population. Now, this is a direct negation to Arjun's point in the first chapter. Arjun says that if I don't fight, then will lead to the production of Varna Sankara. If I do fight, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to kill all because of course in that time, of course, only the men were fighting. So if I kill all the men, then the women will become polluted, because they will have no one. And so what will happen is that they will either be forced to enjoy in inappropriate activity, or they will out of their own accord. But the problem is, from either manner, that unwanted progeny is created, because they don't want to keep the child that they've created. And so what happens there is that due to that sense gratification, there's now unwanted progeny. And when no one takes care of the children, then the whole generation or the whole part of society just becomes ruined, because the children are not trained properly. They don't know what to do. They don't know how to carry out their activities. They become completely going off the line of the scriptures. And so it just becomes a havoc. So Arjun says, I don't want to fight. The fight will only produce these Varna Sankara, these unwanted progeny. And Krishna says, no, it's the other way around, actually. Because if you give up your work, then people are going to see your actions, and then that's actually going to give rise to unwanted progeny. Because they're not going to look at you as someone who they carried out their duty, but instead that's someone who went off the path of their actual duty and did what they thought was right due to renunciation, which is not right. So he's saying that actually it's important to perform your prescribed duty. And so, because of course unwanted population, progeny disturbs the peace in society, because when they're not taken care of, it becomes more and more of a problem. When it's only 1 or 2, then it's not too difficult. But when the whole generation is formed like this, it becomes a massive problem in society. And so Krishna is then explaining to Arjun that I also perform my prescribed duty. I also abide by the scriptures. Why? Because by my actions, other people follow. And now is a point I'd like to just mention extra, which is that Lord's just said that I'm always abiding by scriptures. I'm always doing my prescribed duty. But you might see sometimes some people say, oh, okay, so Lord was hanging around with all these girls in his youth, and he was going under Rasa Leela, all these girls who already are in other relationships, etc., etc. The Lord Krishna is saying like that, and how can he say that he's performing by scriptural injunction? That doesn't make any sense. It's a massive contradiction. And so the Acharyas wonderfully comment on that to help us understand it, because of course we won't understand. They explain that what it is the Lord sometimes does what seems to be incorrect. If you look carefully into it, then you realize it's correct. But what seems to be incorrect, the Lord sometimes does. Why? Just for the pleasure of his devotees. And so if there's ever a discrepancy, the Acharya has mentioned that if there's ever a discrepancy between what the Lord says and what the Lord does, choose what the Lord says. That's better to go with. Don't copy what the Lord does necessarily. Don't go around stealing butter. You can go to Tesco's and buy it. Don't go and steal it. It's not necessary. And so instead, what we should do is we should thereby take up the instruction of the Lord. The other point, of course, is that the Lord is the Lord and he doesn't have to do prescribed duties. But the point that he's saying here is that he generally carries them out. Why did the Lord go and wash the feet of all the brahmanas in the Rajasuya? To set an example, to show what a person should be like. And so what he's telling Arjuna is, you should do your duty because it's important to set an example. And then he explains what an ignorant person does. Someone who's ignorant performs their duties with attachment to their results. The learned might act in the same way, but without attachment, for the sake of leading on the people on the right path. So if you look from an external point of view, you don't know people, you just see these two people. One of them's working, the other one's working. You might think, oh, they're both working, they're on an equal level. But what the difference is necessarily is that what we don't know. So this is the important point. The difference between someone who's ignorant and someone who's learned is that one person's working, and what they are doing by that work is that they just want to work, get the result, some nice result, and from that prescribed duty that they've done, they want to enjoy. The other person is doing their work, and so externally they both appear the same, but he has a different consciousness. It's all about the inside which matters, and that is that he is doing his work, but with detachment to the fruit of that work. He doesn't actually want to do the work so that he can enjoy, but he's doing it and then offering the results to the Lord. And so, although one might seem that these two people are externally the same, they're completely different. And that is the difference between someone who's ignorant and someone who's actually learned. And so, in the next verse, 327, the Lord explains that Na buddhi bedam janayed ajnanam karma sanginam joschayed sarva karmani vidvan yukta samacharan. So as to not disrupt the minds of the ignorant men who are attached to fruitative results of prescribed duties, a learned person should not induce them to stop work. Rather, by working in spirit of devotion, he should engage them in all sorts of activities. So that's the difference. This is a really important verse. So verse number 21, Yad yadacharto shreshtas, whatever great men do, common people follow. That's an important verse. And the other one that I'd say, the next one in this chapter, is verse number 26. That the difference between someone who's ignorant and learned, the ignorant person and the learned person both work. The learned person works with consciousness of detachment, and also he doesn't tell the other people, oh, you should stop working, this work is useless and it won't get you anywhere. He doesn't say like that. He engages them in work, but in work of what? Krishna consciousness. This is the practical way we can practice Krishna consciousness. From this verse, it's actually really important that we take that. So some people think that we should give up work, but actually it's not about doing work and then carrying out those results. It's what it is taking those results, taking them away from yourself and not enjoying them yourself, but providing them to the Lord. And so what we should do is that we should realize that in practical application of devotional service, or nishkama karma yoga, working without desire, one should take their results of their work and offer them to the Lord. And that is the biggest difference between someone who doesn't have this knowledge and someone who does have the knowledge. And so this knowledge is called renunciation of fruit. And so the Lord is explaining here that we should offer this for gradual development in our Krishna consciousness. So devotional service must be, in a sense, this is a very practical way of doing it. We live in the material world. We don't live in some Goloka Vrindavan, or we don't live necessarily in some wonderful holy dham. We live in Manchester. Well, I do anyway. And what we're doing is we have to go to school, we have to go to work, we have jobs. Everyone has to carry on doing their work. So what should they do? Is that they should do their work, but dovetail it into Krishna consciousness. Spiritualize it. We talked about this in the Road to Bhakti lecture. If you have passwords, what can you do? You can make them Krishna or Rama or Govinda. Or you can use some spiritual passwords there. Instead of listening to normal music in the car on the way to work, you can listen to some lecture. Maybe you can listen to some kirtan, Radha Deshmelos, for example. Or if someone has to go and do work sort of in maybe someone's in the medical field, and so that person, what they can do is maybe help out the devotees of the Lord, etc., etc. It's all about practically dovetailing. Why? Because this is the first step in progressing. It's sort of like the catalyst. It just, as soon as one does this, and then it just leads them on a wonderful journey, and it slowly spiritualizes them. And so that's why it's so important. So also, even though the Vedas, they deal with the law, like karma kandi ideology, where you can work. A lot of it, 96% of the Vedas is just you work, get a material result, leave, and then you can enjoy that. Krishna says actually in Bhagavad Gita, chapter 15, verse 15, Vedescha sarver ahameva vedyo. That actually by all the Vedas I am to be known. So this is the goal that should be in the end of in the mind. So just to explain again, just to explain the distinction, karma kanda, someone who does activities according to Vedas just to enjoy materially. Now, sakama karma yogi, someone who does the exact same thing, except for they're doing the action, they're doing the work, they are enjoying the desires of the work, but they know in their mind that the end goal is Krishna. So they're attached to the result of their work, they are still carrying out their work, but they just know that the end goal is the Lord. They have the Lord in mind as the end goal, not just material enjoyment. And then the next person on the path, on the ladder, or the next rung is nishkama karma. So you're still, in a sense, attached to the work, and what you do is you detach yourself from the fruits of that work and then offer them to the Lord. And so this is the process which is mentioned here. And then again, verse number 27 and 28 use this example. The spirit soul, bewildered by the influence of false egos, thinks himself the doer of the activities that are actually carried out by the modes of material nature. And then one who's actually knowledge of absolute truth does not engage himself in the sense and sense gratification, knowing the differences between work in devotion and work for fruitative results. So that's what it is. That's the difference between sakama and nishkama. Work for devotion and then work for fruitative results. So because one who's actually in knowledge knows the difference, knows the three modes of material nature that are controlling, he takes on a completely different idea and he works in a sense differently, knowing that because he has this knowledge, that he shouldn't try and further too much his material enjoyment. Instead, he should just do his work as per necessary, not too little. A lot of times people think you should just reduce it, or not too much, but instead doing it and balancing it out so that he can also practice his spirituality and devotion. And it's all about, again, understanding working in devotion work versus working for the result. So these 2 points again mentioned. And often Lord actually uses this. You'll notice this. If you haven't already noticed, you'll notice this later as well. He'll say, one who does this, and then he'll say, oh, blah, 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 gets a good result. And then on the contrary, one who does that gets a bad result. So the Lord's explaining this, just the style that you'll be able to see in time and time again in the Bhagavad Gita, that he explains to make it very nice and very clear which is good and which is bad. So this is also given. And then now verse number 29. It's a very important verse. I'll just read out the verse. Prakritir guna sammudaha sajjante guna karmasu dana kritsna vido mandan kritsna vinna vichalayet. Bewildered by the modes of material nature, the ignorant fully engage themselves in material activity and become attached. But the wise should not unsettle them, although these duties are inferior due to the performer's lack of knowledge. So what is knowledge? Knowledge is meant to detach from the fruit of the work rather than the work itself. It's a very nice verse. And then this verse again, proper describing the nishkama karma. And also now you'll see a new thing that's coming in that we haven't actually spoken about anywhere else in the Gita except for the second chapter a little bit. The modes of material nature. And we'll deal with them again later. But the mode of goodness, mode of passion is hardworking, over-energetic, maybe the way I deliver right now. He's got a lot of energy, he's working hard. He's not doing immoral, he's not being lazy, he's not being ignorant. That's the mode of ignorance. But he's got this idea, he's working, he's got so many desires, and that's the mode of passion. And so this is generally people in mode of passion, either they're doing karma kanda or sakama karma and karma yoga, sakama karma yoga there. And those in the mode of goodness, who are a little more self-realized, their source of happiness is in themselves. They're not looking anywhere else for their happiness. They have this realization, they have this knowledge, they have this understanding. They're in the mode of goodness. So the important point to realize here is Nishkama Karma Yoga is performed through the mode of goodness. And then the Lord explains this as Nishkama Karma, but the next verse he explains proper bhakti. What is bhakti? So simply, verse number 30, please note this one down. So verse number 21, verse number 26, and verse number 30 is the third one that we should note down. Mai sarvani karmani sanyasadhyatma chetasa nirashir nirmamo bhutva yudhyasva vigatajvara. Therefore, O Arjuna, surrender all your works unto me, with full knowledge of me, without desire for profit, with no claims to proprietorship, and free from lethargy, fight. Why free from lethargy? Because, of course, lethargy or laziness is the mode of ignorance. You should get up and you should fight. Why? Surrendering all your works unto me. Mai sarvani karmani sannyasa dhyatma chetasa. Do you carry out your work and surrender this result unto me? As well, this is sort of, if you want as well, the sort of essence of the whole Bhagavad Gita. Just do your duty and surrender the result unto the Lord. And so this is the important point that Lord Krishna is just saying, just carry out your fighting and offer the results to the Lord. Why? Because then the bondage of fruitative activity won't bind you. You won't be bound by fruitative actions. You won't be bound because, of course, although this might seem counterintuitive, there is good activity, karma, that is what you're meant to do, and it gets you a good result. Now, there's vikarma, a bad activity, going against the scriptures, sinful, evil, miscreant, activity. This is sin, if you want to put it simply. And so both doing karma and vikarma, both carrying out your activity or doing bad activity, they both end up binding you. How? Because good activity means that you'll get a good result, and so you like it, and then you'll do that again. And then the bad activity will obviously mean that you get a bad result and you're punished for it. So what you need to be doing is do your duty, because Arjuna is saying if I do my duty, I'm going to end up getting bound and I'm going to have all these sinful reactions. That's one of his arguments in the first chapter. So Lord is saying, do your duty, but if you surrender it unto me, you're fine. There's no problem. And you won't actually have to worry about on these fruitive activities or fruitive actions that will come to you. Keeping that in mind, one can't just say, I'm just going to go into Manchester, I'm going to kill 20 people, I'm going to surrender that unto the Lord, it's fine. That's not how it works. It's about doing the duty as per the right way, carrying out your prescribed duty, but then also offering the result to the Lord. Prescribed duty, not doing whatever duty anyone else wants to do. It's about doing the prescribed duty. And then you'll see this example I've just given, that one person and then versus another person. So Lord explains in verse 31, those who execute their duty according to my injunctions, without envy, become free from the bondage of fruitive actions. And then verse 32, he gives the opposite. But those who out of envy disregard these teachings and don't follow them are considered to be bereft of knowledge and ruined in their endeavors for perfection. So the Lord is giving him an opportunity. So you can go either this way, which will be good for you, or you go that way, which will be bad for you. So choose an option. And so, yeah, we should also take that into account. We should also follow that, and we should also we can also become benefited from that as well. So it's the point is that we need to follow what the Lord is saying, because he's given one example. If we follow it, it'll be good, and if we don't, then we're bereft of knowledge, and our whatever we endeavor is going to be useless. And so then the Lord moves on to the next point in Nishkama Karma Yoga. So right now we talked about the importance of doing prescribed activity. Number one, if you do it, you have to set an example to other people because you're a great man in society. Number two is that you need to do your activity. Even the learned men do their activity and they're still great devotees, because it's not about the activity, it's about the consciousness. And then number three is what we're going to see now, is that the next verses, he explains that one has to act according to their own nature. And so Arjun, by nature, is a Kshatriya, not by birth. That's a really important thing to keep in mind. By birth, anyone can be anything. That doesn't make sense. By birth, if my parents are doctors, I'm born, I don't automatically become a doctor because my parents are doctors. But if my parents are doctors and because they are interested in medicine, they give me a natural interest in medicine, and then I go up and grow up to become a doctor, that's a different thing. So Lord Krishna never says that you should, look at what system you're born in, and then from your birth alone, you should take your actions. But no, what Lord Krishna explains is that one should carry out activities according to their nature. So Lord Arjun, in this case, he's being trained, he's grown up, he's been trained as a Kshatriya. So he's got that Kshatriya nature. His nature is not that one of business, for example. He wouldn't know how to do trading. He wouldn't know how to be a good merchant. That's not his job. That's not his duty. So he doesn't do that. Instead, his duty is to fight and protect. And so Arjun is a Kshatriya, and his duty is to fight. So Lord is explaining now from the point of one's acting in one's own nature, how that's important to do prescribed duty. So every man of knowledge acts according to his own nature, verse 33. But everyone who follows the nature he has acquired from the three modes, what can repression accomplish? So if you want to do one thing, then simply by repressing that, you're not going to get anywhere. If you want to really, really, really do art, and then you end up taking medicine, are you really going to enjoy that? If you really, really want to do something, and then you take something else, that's not going to help you. So the point that the Lord is saying is, you need to do how you need to fulfill the activity of your nature that the three modes of material nature have given to you, because you're forced to act one way by the modes of nature. And so you simply take those actions, do those activities, don't repress them, and dovetail that into Krishna consciousness, service of the Lord. And then in verse 35, the Lord gives this next important verse. So right now, verse 21, verse 26, verse 30, and then verse 35. This is the fourth important verse in this section. Shreyan swadharmo vigunaha paradharmat svanushtitad swadharme nidanam shreya paradharmo bhayavaha. So it's far better to discharge one's prescribed duties, even though faultily, than another's duties perfectly. Destruction in the course of performing one's own duty is better than engaging in another's duty. For to follow another path is dangerous. How can we understand that? This same verse is there is mentioned in the 18th chapter. Sorry, not second. In the contents of the Bhagavad Gita, the summary of the Bhagavad Gita, in the 18th chapter. And so the Lord is here saying that it's better to do your own duty. If you can't do it, it's better to do the duty that you're meant to do, all right, instead of doing someone else's job perfectly. Why? How can we understand that? How does that make sense? And then he says, for following someone else's path is dangerous. And the analogy given is, I'm showing some symptoms of being ill. Now I see my sister's also showing some symptoms of being ill. Now I think, okay, she took that medicine, it cured her. I'm going to take that medicine as well. Now, that is not going to get me anywhere, realistically. Why? Because I've not consulted a doctor. I don't know what the right medicine is. Maybe if I take that medicine, what will generally happen, if that's not the right medicine for me, is I'm going to become extremely even more ill. It's not going to help. And so what the Lord's explaining here is that do your duty, follow your path, and do it perfectly. Why? Because it's better to do that than to take someone else's path, but then performing that well, but that's not actually for you. And it's so much more important that we understand that everyone's not the same, for example. And so in that way, Lord is saying that you do your duty according to your nature. So your nature is not to run away into the forest and just renounce yourself and live amongst the sages. That's not what you want to do. You're not like that. You've got a Kshatriya nature. You're very passionate by nature. You're very, you can fight well. You love fighting. You love with weapons. You love archery. Your nature does not suit your nature. So why are you saying that I'm going to give up my work? Instead, so the Lord is saying again, the importance of carrying out one's prescribed duty. Great devotees like Janak Maharaj, they carried out their prescribed duty, but by detachment from the fruit of their actions, they were great devotees. You're a great person, you're a member of society. So by looking at you, other people are going to look at your example. And so you have to carry out prescribed duty because otherwise there's a problem. And then now finally, he's come to the conclusion saying, it's not part of your nature to go and renounce in the forest. Your nature is Kshatriya, person who wants to fight, a warrior. Or, well, Kshatriya literally means Kshatrayate, one who protects. So that's your nature. And so it's so important to carry out one's own duties in one's own nature and trying out to do someone else's duty perfectly. And so it's not about changing what you want to do, changing the action. Do your duty, do your prescribed duty, and then offer the results to the Lord. This is Nishkama Karma Yoga, and it's in the mode of goodness. And so what's also we're going to see now, and as this section comes to a conclusion, we move on to the next one about the mode of goodness and how Nishkama Karma Yoga, which is performing work without attachment to the fruit of that work, is only performed in the mode of goodness, and how we need to come to at least the mode of goodness before we springboard off into devotional service, because otherwise it's extremely difficult. It's like missing a rung on the ladder. So then, now that Arjun's heard this, he's thinking, okay, so this is my duty. Okay, now that's made sense, I'm convinced. And so he says that, okay, I've got another question now. So he says, my dear Lord, verse number 36, why do people do sinful activity even though they know what the right thing to do is? So the direct translation is, O descendants of Vrishni, by what is one impelled to do sinful acts even unwillingly, as if engaged by force? So now that Arjuna has just heard that doing your duty is important, doing this is important, he's now got this intelligence, and he's thinking, okay, so this makes a lot of sense. Now he's got this transcendental knowledge, and then he thinks, so now that I know that this is my prescribed duty, why do people in general, even if you want to put, why do people sin? Even if they know that it's not the right thing to do, but they seem to be forced to do it. And then the final section of this chapter deals with, if you want to put it into one term, the problem of lust. And Lord describes that verse number 37. Next really important verse to note down. What have we got so far? Verse number 21. Verse number 26. The difference between the ignorant and learned person. And then verse number 30, about the importance of bhakti, just surrendering unto the Lord. Verse number 35, which is about why doing your own duty is important instead of doing someone else's job. And now verse number 37. Kama esha krodha esha rajoguna samudbhavaha mahasano mahapapa vidyanam iha vairinam. Personality of Godhead said, it is lust only, Arjuna, which is born of contact with material mode of passion and later transformed into wrath, anger, and which is the all-devouring sinful enemy of this world. So the one cause of sin, the pinpoint, is given as lust. Lust causes all these problems. And how does this lust come about? Rajoguna samudbhava. When one is in contact with the mode of passion, then one is more likely to have lust. And so the Lord is explaining here that mode of goodness, we need to come to the platform of the mode of goodness from the mode of ignorance and passion, because then from the mode of goodness, we can actually carry out Nishkama Karma Yoga, where we are not attached to the fruits of our activities, and then we can make progress. Then he carries on that as fire is covered by smoke, as a mirror is covered by dust, or as the embryo is covered within the womb, similarly, the living entity is covered by different degrees of this lust. So everyone has some sort of amount of lust. Well, not necessarily everyone, but there are different varying degrees of lust. That's the point. So he's given 3 examples. A fire covered by smoke. There's smoke over the fire, but it's a thin layer. It's not too much. Now, a mirror covered by dust. So you can't see yourself in the mirror when it's covered by this much dust, but you can see the mirror at least. So a mirror covered by dust, or the embryo covered within the womb. Now, you can't see the embryo within the womb at all, because that's a much thicker layer, if you'd like. So the example he's given is that there's different degrees of lust that one can be covered by. And so this obscures one's consciousness, put it in other words. Thus, the wise living entity's pure consciousness becomes covered by eternal enemy, which is never satisfies and which burns like fire. And so lust is given, the example of lust is that it's like a fire. And if you try and put a fire out with ghee, it's not going to work. It's just going to become a stronger fire. So when lusty desires come, if one tries to satisfy those desires, it just makes it stronger, makes the fire stronger. It's a positive feedback loop, if you like. So once it happens, you want to do it again, and once it happens, you want to do it again, and so it just gets worse and worse. You're just stuck in a never-ending cycle of carrying out and becoming controlled by these lusty activities. And where is this lust situated? Then the Lord explains. This lust is situated in which three places? The senses, the mind, and intelligence. And so the lust covers them, but the real knowledge, and completely bewilders one person. And you can think of this, if you'd like, as a software. Define lust. Lust is so this is not just sensual. That's a really important point. I didn't mention that earlier. This is not just sensual desire to enjoy that sort of sense gratification. It's any sense gratification. So this can. Oh, okay. So you want like that. So in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, it's given that Sarvendriya Priti Vamsha Dare Bale Kama Krishnendriya Priti Vamsha Dare Prema Nama. So one who tries to enjoy something that you try to do to enjoy your sense activity, that is defined as kama. You call that kama, lust. And Krishnendriya Priti Vamsha, to make Krishna happy if you do something, Dare Prema Nama, that is called love. So this is the difference between lust and love. So people might think that lust only means sensual pleasure or that sort of type. It's not just that. Lust defines everything in that bracket of sense gratification and trying to please oneself as without the Lord in the picture. And so the lust covering these mind, intelligence, and false ego, no matter how much knowledge you have, if it's covered by lust, it's useless. Just like if a cell is infected by a virus, then that cell's functions become completely gone. It's just what happens, it becomes a machine for just producing more and more viruses, and it ends up pumping more and more viruses out. Or you can talk about another type of virus. You get computer software and it's the code's all right and everything, but it's now infected by a virus. You can't expect that code to work properly because there's a virus now there. So similarly, lust is like this type of virus. It's infecting, it's infectious, it's like a disease. And it's stopping the soul or the intelligence, mind, and false on the ego from providing their real function, from stopping them from doing their real function. And so, yeah, it's the strategic points. Just like when you're fighting in an army, you have to target the right point. So this lust here has targeted these three places. And so Krishna explains in verse number 41, the penultimate verse, in the very beginning, curb this symbol of sin by regulating the senses and slay the destroyer of knowledge and self-realization. So as long as one is trying to gratify one's senses, one is having these lusty desires, one will not be able to make progress. One will not be able to make advancement. That's just the way it is. So what we need to do is we need to try and start regulating ourselves, regulating our sense enjoyment. Otherwise, we won't be able to come from the mode of passion, Rajoguna, to Sattvaguna, the mode of goodness. And then when we're in Sattvaguna, we can carry out work with renunciation of fruit, or work in devotion rather than work in fruitive enjoyment. And finally, verse number 42, the last verse in this chapter, the working senses are superior to dull matter. The mind is higher than the senses, the intelligence is still higher than the mind, and the soul is higher than the intelligence. You might have seen the diagram of, sorry, one more? Yes, there is one more verse, sorry. And so you might have seen the diagram of how the soul is controlling the intelligence, and the intelligence is controlling the mind. But the point is that when all of this system becomes infected, if you like, by the lust, then it's unable to carry out the right activity. And so that becomes a massive problem. And then final verse, apologies. Thus knowing oneself to be transcendental to the material senses, mind, and intelligence, O mighty Arjuna, one should steady the mind by deliberate spiritual intelligence, and thus by spiritual strength conquer this insatiable enemy known as lust. So first thing, insatiable enemy. How is it insatiable? Because once you do sense gratification, you want to do more. And once you do it again, then you want to do even more. So it never stops. People think that if I get this, I'll be happy, or if I get that, I'll be happy. But no, it just carries on, keeps on going on and on and on. That's the nature of the lust. And so one, by spiritual intelligence, should start to train the mind, should start to conquer the mind. And he should use this spiritual strength that he gets. And so what's explained now is that this transcendental knowledge is what's necessary for one to carry out this transitioning between the mode of passion to the mode of goodness, so one can stop just working just for the sake of getting the fruit of that work, but work in a way that he can renounce himself from the fruit of the work and come to that platform of nishkama karma yoga. And then also that if one now has this transcendental knowledge, that makes the change. So the knowledge doesn't cause renunciation of action, but renunciation of the fruit of action. And so now the Lord takes the next part, which becomes the importance, and starts talking about this transcendental knowledge and nature of that transcendental knowledge. And so the fourth chapter, of course, is entitled Transcendental Knowledge. And so this is how the third chapter comes to conclusion. So to summarize it, we start off with Arjun asking at the beginning that, Lord, you mentioned that we should be in knowledge, but then you also said that we should do work, as if they're opposing, even though they're not, because he's not understood it properly. So then the Lord explains that what is this nishkama karma yoga, that how can one do karma yoga without desire. And then he takes on to explain from verses 10 to 16 about, let's start off with the yoga ladder. Let's start right from the bottom, and then let's explain how this whole journey, how this path progresses. And so from those verses, he describes the karma kanda idea of how by working, Arjun, by doing your duty, you can have material enjoyment. So that negates Arjun's first argument that if I do this, I'll have no enjoyment. And then the Lord moves on afterwards from verses 17 to 35, which is the main amount of this, the chunk of this chapter. And he describes about why it's very important to carry out one's prescribed duty, and that why carry that out in Krishna consciousness. So we can talk about the practical application of Krishna consciousness there. And then finally, from verses 36 to verse 43, the importance of the mode of goodness, the problem of lust, which arises from the mode of passion, coming to the mode of goodness, and how this transcendental knowledge helps us make that transition from the mode of passion to the mode of goodness, and how we can get rid of that lust by controlling the senses. So this is the quick summary of the third chapter of the Bhagavad Gita as it is. Hare Krishna. Does anyone have any questions, comments, or corrections? So I'm just having a look in the chat. Haribol Shashi Mataji, Haribol Ram Prabhu, Haribol Kailash Prabhu, Purushottam Prabhu, Raj Kumar Govind Prabhu. Thank you very much. So Raj Kumar Govind Prabhu's put a question there, and he's just asked, Prabhupada says simple living and high thinking. Could you kindly explain how this can be done in today's situation? Because in most cases, I think that's meant to say, it's impossible to work outside and have a simple life, as most jobs take our time. So it's not, so yeah, because the job takes majority of the time, whether you look at any job that might be, we spend more time in the job than we do anywhere else at home, or even as we're carrying out our free time activities, we spend more time at work. And so what we should do there is that we should spiritualize that work. That's the point. So it's the small things, the practical application in the work itself, because you can't give up work. Instead, you should do that work, but do it for Krishna. And so I'm just thinking of examples I can remember right now. Still, the best one I can think of is when you're at work, a lot of people listen to music. Instead of listening to music, maybe listen to a lecture, Prabhupada lecture, or maybe listen to a little kirtan. So that, and then your consciousness gradually becomes purified. So then you don't become affected by the work because you've got that consciousness. So it's about the consciousness that differs one from actually just doing the work, whereas someone doing the work but staying in that sort of that frame of mind is what makes the difference. And okay. So simple living, high thinking. Yeah, so simple living, high thinking. I think a quote from Shiva Maharaj will sum that up. Past the middle class, money can't get you any happiness. And that's a very important point, because a lot of times people say money can't get you happiness, but that's not right, because someone who's poverty-stricken from a material perspective, someone who's poverty-stricken has absolutely no happiness. How can someone who, for example, is homeless, it's a very difficult life in that sense. So past the middle class, Maharaj explains that money can't get you happiness. You need a little bit, which will help sustain your livelihood. But then after that, if you're working too much to try and, I don't know, own 17 supercars, then that is not necessary. That is where the line should be drawn between necessity and then unnecessarily extra sense enjoyment. If you're working too hard, what's the point of working too hard only to get this simple material pleasure? You can only work as much as necessary to maintain one's livelihood, but then after that, past that, it's too much sense gratification. So I hope that answers your question, Prabhu. Thank you very much, Shiva Prabhu and Bharati Mataji. If there are any other questions, Raj Kumar Govind Prabhu's put a question. If there's any other questions, we've got one from the live audience here. On the last verse. How to spiritualize everything. Yeah. How can we spiritualize? Okay, so the question is, how, in the last verse translation, it says that steady the mind by deliberate spiritual intelligence, and thus by spiritual strength conquer this insatiable enemy of lust. And the question is, how can we spiritualize everything? By putting Krishna into the picture, then anything becomes spiritualized. So that's not saying that a murderer can now put Krishna in his mind as he goes and carries out his murders. It's doing the prescribed, what duty you should be doing to maintain the livelihood, but then also you just put Krishna into the picture. So instead of you being the center, then you put Krishna in the center. So the difference here is you can't put Krishna in the center when you put something else in the center. The first thing that you need to do is become self-satisfied, to come to the mode of goodness. And then after that, by Krishna consciousness, then you put Krishna in the picture. That's the difference between karma yoga and bhakti yoga. That's a subtle difference. But this, by spiritualizing slowly, by hearing more, generally hearing more, reading more, listening to more kirtan instead of mundane music or the radio or whatever. We put on kirtan and lectures. Wherever, if we put this ABCD, it should be good. The ABCD of Krishna consciousness. Association, you want to hang out with Krishna conscious friends. Tamal Krishna Maharaj always says, the more friends you have in Krishna consciousness, the more likely you'll be a better devotee. So association, if you want to hang out with Krishna conscious people. B, books. If you want to read, don't read some magazine or whatnot. Read something Krishna conscious. Read the Bhagavad Gita, or read something that will take you closer to the Lord. So all these Prabhupada books are there. Then C, chanting. So a lot of people are taking up these meditations and whatnot. This mantra meditation is really useful, especially done in the morning. It can curb the mind and control the mind. And so chanting is a form of meditation that works wonderfully. And D, diet. And everyone loves the diet aspect of prasadam. So whatever you eat, try and offer it to the Lord. And simply by offering it to the Lord, it goes from bhoga to prasadam. That's it, you're done. So basically, whatever we do, if we follow these A, B, C, and Ds, we'll be able to practically get E, ecstasy. I like that. Nice. We'll be able to get ecstasy if we practice these A, B, and C, and D. So these are the practical ways we can include Krishna. Okay, I've run quite a bit over time, so I'd like to apologize for that. So if there's no further questions, I think we'll move on and see next week. We will have fourth chapter, first part, about transcendental knowledge. Now, I will say one thing. My school is starting, so I don't know how much it will necessarily be me in the seat. It might be my dad instead. But I will try as much, because it's only one time per week, to try and carry on with this series, at least till we finish the Bhagavad Gita. And so next time we'll do transcendental knowledge, the fourth chapter of Bhagavad Gita, and the first part. And we'll see you next time, next week, same place, and prasadam will be served at your own home. Hare Krishna. Hare Bol.